The Crown returned last week on Netflix for the first part of the final season of Peter Morgan's royal epic. The 4 episodes released, with the second 6 to drop mid-December, focus largely on the final days of Princess Diana and her whirlwind romance with Harrod's heir Dodi Fayed. As we ramp up the timeline towards a period that is seared into many of our brains, the show kicks off after a prologue that shows Diana's car faithfully speeding towards her final destination, with a sharp change in tone as it begins to bathe in nostalgia. We get blasts of George Michael, of Chumbawamba, of Smash Mouth, while a young William and Harry watch Jumanji and play Street Fighter on their PlayStation. It's a sharp left turn for a show that was arguably at its peak when there was more pronounced gaps in the history books for them to play around with, and sometimes just outright fictionalized, to the point that fans and then eventually Netflix insisted that they put a disclaimer at the start of the last season. I'm no royalist by any means. This is probably the first project covering the Windsors that has really grabbed me to date. But what upset some made the show fun for me. It was how liberally they messed around with the history of bonkers elite family who were no doubt watching the entire show as it aired. How fun was it, for example, for them to suggest with zero material evidence that Prince Philip was riding around on Elizabeth when he was on his travels in Africa? When you come for Diana, though, you're inevitably going to ruffle some feathers, because even nearly 30 years after her death, people still hold her in such a high regard. And that isn't to say that the show isn't respectful to the princess. Elizabeth Debicki's performance of her continues to be masterful, and she's often portrayed as the only person within her bubble who can actually see the world clearly, and it's just a loving mother trying to get home to her boys. Once Debicki debuted last season, she proved as much of a show stealer as Diana was to the royal family, and indeed to the national conversation. You really feel the enormous weight of her loss, particularly on those around her. And in the run-up to it, there's a constant ominous tone as we see her move closer and closer to that fateful tunnel, which makes moments like her final phone call with her kids really, really sting. They also really effectively showed how her life and legend almost made her day-to-day existence near impossible to live, which adds to an almost tragic inevitability to the crash. Honestly, having seen many of the stinging critics' reviews, I sat there up until she passed away wondering what the big deal was. I felt that, to be honest, of the 4 episodes, this was an excellently made series of television. And then her ghost showed up. Yes, seriously, they have Diana's ghost in this. Look, The Crown isn't known for its soft strokes. When you have to straddle 60 years of history and tell, like, often, sometimes this show will tell like 2-3 years worth of history within 1 hour of television. I get that there are times when you have to lean on clunky metaphors to illustrate a point. And do you know what? If you get and appreciate that, it's actually, for me, one of the show's cheesy charms. And I got what they were going for here, like, rather than showing us her corpse, which they didn't show us kind of the crash in detail. They just showed it from afar and other people watching more than anything else. Well, rather than show us kind of anything really upsetting, they gave us kind of one last look at her as we remember her. But if you're essentially going to turn Princess Diana into a fucking Force ghost, you're really going to upset some people. In all, though, I felt that this was one slight, well-intentioned misstep in a show prone to them on occasion, but it's also a show, at the same time, you have to remember, trying to walk a tightrope to give us a complete, satisfying narrative that it simply can't, by virtue of having to rely on guesswork a lot of the time to feed us what we want, which is what goes on behind closed doors of this hallowed palace with this fucked up family. There are other nits you can pick about this series. If you like, Dominic West remains excellent as Charles, but his portrayal seems more progressive and favorable than even his own son thinks he is today. There's a scene after Diana's death with Elizabeth and John Price's Philip chastising him that also feels really unlikely to actually have happened and really clunky as well. And the show struggles to keep Imelda Staunton and Elizabeth relevant, and an attempt to kind of re-centralize her amid the death doesn't really work for me. And I also thought they could have done more to keep core show characters like Margaret and the Queen Mother, who've kind of been central to the plot. And I appreciate that, again, the royal family and the attention of the public does move along, and the show has to reflect that. But I would have liked to see them more involved. I think the Queen Mother gets 1 or 2 lines throughout all of this. She's just kind of a background character, where she was a major character in the early series. All in all, though, if you, like me, are a bit perversely obsessed with The Crown, this is more of it, and it's the upper end of things in terms of quality for me. I'm looking forward to the final episodes in December, and while I understand they want to keep some historical distance and not go all the way up to date, I do actually hope they do a Reeling in the Years a decade from now and reboot it so we can get the likes of Harry's exile, Prince Andrew's disgrace, and obviously the deaths of Elizabeth and Philip. Anyway, that's all on Netflix now. Like I said, first 4 episodes have been released and are available to view whenever you like, and then the 6 episodes I think are coming on the 14th of December. So check it out if you're into The Crown. I enjoyed it personally.